In this video, we're going to look at the acid-base balance. So acid-base balance, chemically, the logarithmic expression of ionization, we can use the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation to look at that, where the pH is your pKa plus the log of looking at your amount that is going to have hydrogen released versus hydrogen still attached to it of your particular acid that you're looking at. If you're not familiar with this equation from taking chemistry, it's not going to really be a big deal in being able to understand these concepts. The overall acid-base balance in the body is maintained by controlling the amount of hydrogen ion concentration in the body fluids, especially the extracellular fluid. So normal plasma is going to have a narrow range between 7.35 and 7.45. This can be influenced by diets. Diets high in proteins can actually acidify the blood a little bit more. We have three major mechanisms to regulate pH. We've got a buffer system with the respiratory system exhaling carbon dioxide, and then the kidney excretion of the hydrogen ion. So when we look at this, if your blood pH increases, you have a decrease in the hydrogen ion. So the buffers can release hydrogen ion to bring it back into the bloodstream. The respiratory system can decrease the number of hydrogen ions that are detected by the medullary respiratory center. That will decrease the rate and depth of respiration, and that will decrease the gas exchange between the blood and the air, and you'll have increased blood carbon dioxide to react with the water to produce the carbonic acid, which will give you the hydrogen ion. And then the kidneys, they can decrease the number of hydrogen ions detected by the distal tubules. They'll decrease the hydrogen ion secretion in the urine, which will increase the urine pH. And then you have fewer hydrogen ions removed from the blood, and that will increase the dissociation of carbonic acid to form the hydrogen ion. So all three of these are going to be working together to try and maintain proper pH. So we have different types of acids in the body. The volatile acids can leave solution and enter the atmosphere, so things like carbonic acid. Fixed acids don't leave solution. They remain in the body fluids until they're excreted. So things like sulfuric acid and phosphoric acid that you get by catabolism. And then organic acids are produced by aerobic metabolism. They metabolize rapidly so they don't accumulate. And then you can have some produced by anaerobic metabolism that can build up rapidly, like lactic acid. So the buffer systems, they are going to quickly but temporarily bind the hydrogen ion. They'll raise the pH, but they don't actually remove the hydrogen ion. Most of the time, they're going to be a weak acid and a salt of that acid that functions as a weak base. So they can change strong acid bases to weak acid bases. We have three buffer systems. The protein buffer system is the most abundant. So you've got hemoglobin in the red blood cells and albumin in the blood plasma. Hemoglobin acts as a buffer by picking up the carbon dioxide or hydrogen ion. Free carboxyl acts like an acid by releasing the hydrogen ion. So this is showing here with an amino acid here. You can have, if the pH falls, you can have the hydrogen ion fall off. If the pH rises, the hydrogen ion can be put back on. The bicarbonate buffer system, it's based on the bicarbonate ion and it acting as a weak base, and then carbonic acid acting as a weak acid. So this works because carbon dioxide and water combine to form this buffer, but it cannot protect against pH changes due to respiratory problems where there is excess or shortage of carbon dioxide. So here you can see the carbonic acid going back and forth between bicarbonate ion. And then the phosphate buffer system. Phosphates are major anions in the intracellular fluid and minor in the extracellular fluid. They're an important regulator of the pH in the cytosol, but act as a buffer to acids in the urine. So when we look at buffer systems in the intracellular fluid, you've got the phosphate buffer system and the protein buffer system. For the extracellular fluid, you also have the protein buffer system and the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffer system. So you have the hemoglobin buffer system in the red blood cells, the amino acid buffers, and then the plasma protein buffers. So exhaling carbon dioxide and excreting a hydrogen ion is important. The pH of the body fluids can be adjusted by a change in the rate and the depth of respiration. That usually takes about 1 to 3 minutes to occur. So when you have an increased rate and depth, you're going to have more carbon dioxide exhaled. It will increase the blood pH. When you have a decreased rate and depth, you'll have less carbon dioxide exhaled and you'll decrease the pH. So when you think about it, if you're looking at having excess lactic acid in a muscle, you're going to increase the pH, or excess lactic acid is going to decrease the pH and increase the respiratory rate. So the pH in the muscles is going to be tied to how quickly you are breathing. That's going to help you get more oxygen in when you are exerting yourself more. Increased carbon dioxide in the body fluids lowers the pH. So kidneys will secrete the hydrogen ion and reabsorb bicarbonate to aid in maintaining the pH. Urine can be 1,000 times more acidic than blood. So while that sounds huge, remember with pH changes, each whole number change is a 10-fold difference. So if you go from 7 to 6, that's a 10-fold difference. 7 to 5 is 100-fold. 7 to 4 is 1,000. So kidneys can also synthesize new bicarbonate and save filtered bicarbonate. So this is just kind of a summary here. Body metabolism is going to produce acids, but you've got to stay at pH 7.35 to 7.45. So your respiratory system is going to exhale the carbon dioxide to help get rid of the acid. The urinary system excretes the acid, and it will reabsorb and synthesize bicarbonate to help neutralize the acid. So again, we like to have homeostasis of this system here. This is essentially showing what happens is you have some stimulus disrupts homeostasis. So if you have a pH increase, you're going to have chemoreceptors in the medulla oblongata as well as in the aortic and carotid bodies. Going to send a message to the inspiratory area of the medulla oblongata. The diaphragm is going to contract more forcefully and frequently so that you exhale more carbon dioxide. As less bicarbonate forms, fewer hydrogen ions are present, and the pH increases and the concentration decreases to get back to homeostasis. So what the body is really monitoring is the carbon dioxide levels. So when we look at kidney excretion here, you can see there is the fluid in the lumen of the tubule. Here is your intercalated cells in the collecting duct. And this is how you can have secretion of the hydrogen ion going back out into the urine. And bicarbonate being reabsorbed. Here is your buffering system in the urine. So you can have here the hydrogen going on, getting attached to the phosphate buffer. So when we regulate acid and base balance, remember acid is going to yield a hydrogen ion when it's dissolved in water. Bases yield a hydroxide. So if you have increased hydrogen ion, you decrease the pH. It's more acidic. If you decrease the hydrogen ion, you increase the pH. It's more basic or alkaline. So acidosis is when the pH falls below 7.34. Alkalosis is when the pH is above 7.44. So that number is not exactly 7 because remember the blood range wants to be 7.35 to 7.45. So the bicarbonate reference range is 22 to 26, and the pressure of the carbonic acid, the reference range is 35 to 45. So if you're trying to tell if a person is in metabolic or respiratory acidosis or alkalosis, the first step is to look at the pH. So that will tell you if it's acidosis or alkalosis. So 6.98 would be severe acidosis. They're probably dead at that point. 7.5 would be alkalosis. So then the next step is to figure out, is it metabolic or respiratory? So if the bicarbonate level is abnormal, it's metabolic. If the pressure of carbon dioxide level is abnormal, it's respiratory. And then in step 3, you've got the compensations. This is where the body is trying to compensate for the abnormalities. So with respiratory acidosis, this results from hypoventilation and excess buildup of carbon dioxide. So your body wants to exhale that carbon dioxide. The pressure of carbon dioxide would be greater than 45. So to compensate, the kidneys are going to excrete acid and reclaim the bicarbonate and produce acidic urine. So some things that can cause this: congestive heart failure, COPD, the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, asphyxiation, any condition that decreases movement of the carbon dioxide out. So treatment is to increase the exhalation of carbon dioxide, ventilation therapy. With respiratory alkalosis, this results from hyperventilation. You've got excessive elimination of carbon dioxide. The pressure of carbon dioxide is less than 7.35. So to compensate, the kidneys will excrete bicarbonate and reclaim the acid to produce alkaline urine. Things that can cause this: pulmonary embolism, hysteria, fever, salicylic drugs. So that would be things like aspirin, high altitude, anxiety, stroke. So the treatment is to breathe into the paper bag. That's to try and regain some of the carbon dioxide. So with metabolic acidosis, the blood is acidic, pH is decreased, there's too much acid in the blood. The bicarbonate is less than 22. So to compensate, the body is going to increase breathing, hyperventilation, to try and blow off the excess carbon dioxide. So this can be seen with renal disease when they're unable to excrete the hydrogen ion and reclaim the bicarbonate, pancreatic damage, and the accumulation of acid, so ketosis from dieting or diabetes. So it's treated with IV sodium bicarbonate. Metabolic alkalosis, the blood is alkaline, the pH is increased, so there's too much bicarbonate. Bicarbonate is greater than 26, so with compensation, breathing slows. You have hypoventilation to try and retain the carbon dioxide. Causes: ingesting bicarbonate, loss of acid from vomiting, excess renal excretion of the acid, severe dehydration, antacids, diuretics. So this is treated with fluid to correct the chloride and potassium ions, as well as other electrolyte deficiencies, and then looking to correct whatever else was the cause of the alkalosis. So just to kind of help yourself be able to process this a little bit, think about how somebody doing a keto diet, how that might affect their exercising if they're doing exercise where they're going to be breathing heavily. Also think about how a swimmer holding their breath while they're swimming, how that might affect the system in there, that desire to breathe when they're swimming. So mechanisms that maintain the pH of body fluids, you've got the buffer systems. So they help to prevent drastic changes. The proteins are the most abundant buffers in the body cells and blood. Hemoglobin inside the red blood cells is a good buffer. The carbonic acid bicarbonate system that helps to regulate blood pH. It's the most abundant buffers in the extracellular fluid. Phosphates are important for intracellular fluid and urine. Exhaling carbon dioxide, so when you increase the exhalation of carbon dioxide, the pH rises. With decreased exhalation, you have carbon dioxide levels are going to decrease and the pH falls. And then the kidneys, the renal tubules can secrete hydrogen into the urine and reabsorb bicarbonate, so it's not lost in the urine. So compensation that can happen for this, you have changes in the blood pH that can be countered by a compensation. This is your body trying to deal with it in whatever mechanism it can. Complete compensation could actually bring things back within the normal range. Partial compensation is still too low or too high, it's just getting closer. So respiratory compensation, you can see hyperventilation or hypoventilation. So you would see that with the metabolic acidosis or alkalosis. Renal compensation, where you would secrete and reabsorb. So secretion of the hydrogen ion, reabsorption of bicarbonate. This would be seen with respiratory acidosis and alkalosis. So if it's respiratory compensations help with the metabolic, renal compensations help with the respiratory. So this is kind of a diagnostic chart that you can go through to help and determine, okay, what am I dealing with? So if your pH is acidosis, then you can check the pressure of the carbon dioxide. If it's not increased, then head down the pathway for metabolic acidosis. If it's normal, you have acute metabolic acidosis. If it's decreased, you can have chronic compensated metabolic acidosis. So it's respiratory compensation. You check the anion gap. If it's normal, it's due to loss of bicarbonate or generation, indigestion. So some examples could be diarrhea. If it's increased, some examples could be lactic acidosis, ketoacidosis, chronic renal failure. If your pressure of carbon dioxide is increased, you look at respiratory acidosis. Primary cause is hypoventilation. So if it's chronic compensated, some examples could be emphysema or asthma. If it's normal, you could have acute respiratory acidosis. So this could be respiratory failure, CNS damage, or pneumothorax. So then for alkalosis here, again, first step, check the pH. Then the pressure of the carbon dioxide. So if it's increased, metabolic acidosis. Some examples could be vomiting or loss of gastric acid. If it's decreased, respiratory alkalosis, hyperventilation. So then you check the bicarbonate levels. If they're normal or slightly decreased, you could look towards acute respiratory alkalosis. This could happen from fever or panic attacks. If it's more decreased chronic compensated respiratory alkalosis. Some examples could be anemia or CNS damage. And that is the end of the acid-base balance.